The morning mist clung to Millbrook like a shroud, wrapping around houses that had seen better decades and dreams that have forgotten how to take flight. On Maple Street, where the sidewalks cracked like broken promises and the streetlights flickered with uncertainty, 12-year-old Sophia Martinez adjusted the wheels on her chair for the third time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Her hands, strong from months of pushing herself forward when the world seemed determined to hold her back, gripped the rims with quiet determination. The accident had been 8 months ago. The drunk driver who took her legs had walked away without a scratch. But Sophia? Sophia had learned something the world didn't expect from a girl in a wheelchair. She'd learned that courage wasn't about standing tall. It was about rolling forward when every instinct screamed to turn back. The route to Lincoln Middle School stretched before her like a gauntlet. 6 blocks of cracked pavement, steep curbs, and something worse, the stairs. The whispers. The way people looked through her like she was already invisible, already defeated. But this morning was different. This morning, she'd heard them before she saw them. The rumble started low, like distant thunder rolling across the valley. Then, louder, closer. The sound of engines that had tasted freedom on 1,000 highways. Voices of steel and chrome that spoke a language older than traffic lights and crosswalks. Marcus Bull Rodriguez had been riding for 37 years. His Harley-Davidson Road King had more miles on it than most people put on 3 cars, and the scars on his knuckles told stories of roads traveled and battles won. He wore the colors of the Desert Saints, not Hell's Angels, but brothers in spirit, a motorcycle club that had spent 2 decades earning respect through protection, not intimidation. At 62, Bull's weathered face carried lines that spoke of laughter, shared around campfires, and tears shed for fallen brothers. His gray beard was braided with leather cords, and his eyes held the kind of wisdom that only comes from choosing to be better than the world expects you to be. This particular Tuesday morning found him leading a group of 8 club members through Millbrook's quiet residential streets. They weren't looking for trouble. Trouble had a way of finding them without any help. They were heading to Murphy's garage on the far side of town, where their brother Jake needed help rebuilding an engine. That's when Bull saw her, a small figure in a wheelchair, positioned at the corner of Maple and 3rd, where the sidewalk dipped into an intersection that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never seen a wheelchair in their life. She sat motionless, staring at the steep curb that might as well have been Mount Everest. Bull raised his fist, the universal signal for his brothers to slow down. 8 motorcycles rumbled to a stop, their engines idling like mechanical heartbeats. The girl looked up, and Bull felt something shift in his chest. She wasn't afraid. Most kids her age took one look at 8 bikers and ran for the nearest adult. But this one tilted her chin up and met his gaze with eyes that held more determination than fear. "You okay, little sister?" Bull called over the rumble of engines. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice came out steady. "I'm trying to get to school, but this curb." She gestured helplessly at the impossible barrier. Bull dismounted, his boots hitting the asphalt with authority. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4" and solid as granite. But when he knelt beside Sophia's wheelchair, his movements were gentle as a father tucking in a child. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophia Martinez." "Well, Sophia Martinez, I'm Bull. And these ugly guys behind me are my brothers." A few good-natured insults flew from the other bikers. "How about we give you a hand?" Sophia's eyes widened. "You'd do that?" "Sister, we'd be honored." What Bull didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Sophia's journey to school had become a daily nightmare. It wasn't just the physical obstacles, though those were real enough. The broken sidewalks, the curbs that seemed designed to keep wheelchairs away, the building entrances that required detours and assistance. It was the other kids, 3 blocks from school. Near the old Dairy Queen that had been boarded up since the economy went south, a group of 8th graders had made Sophia's route their personal hunting ground. Led by Derek Hoffman, a 15-year-old who'd been held back twice and had learned that cruelty was the easiest way to feel powerful. They'd turned her disability into their entertainment. Yesterday, they'd blocked her path and made her late for first period. Last week, one of them had accidentally knocked her books from her lap. Derek had a particular talent for making his harassment look like accidents, jokes, teenage stupidity, instead of calculated cruelty. "Hey, Wheels," Derek would call out, his voice carrying that particular tone bullies perfected friendly on the surface, vicious underneath. "Need a push?" His friends would laugh. Sophia would force herself to smile, to pretend it didn't cut like glass, and find another route. But in a small town, alternate routes only lasted so long before they became new hunting grounds. This morning, as Bull and his brothers helped Sophia navigate the treacherous curb, she made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of taking her usual detour around the Dairy Queen, she asked them to stay on Maple Street. "You sure, little sister?" Bull asked, noting the way her hands tightened on the wheelchair's rims. "Seems like there might be an easier path." "I'm tired of easier paths," Sophia said quietly. "I'm tired of running from people who think being mean makes them strong." Bull's eyes sharpened. In those 8 words, he heard something familiar, the voice of someone who'd been pushed too far and was ready to push back. He'd heard it in his own throat 30 years ago, when a group of college kids had cornered him outside a bar and learned that underestimating a biker was a mistake you only made once. "Sophia," he said carefully, "is someone bothering you?" She almost said no. The automatic response, the safe response. Adults always asked, but they never really wanted to hear the answer. They wanted problems that could be solved with a phone call to the principal, a stern talking to, a suspension that would make the bullies more careful but not less cruel. But looking at Bull, really looking at him, Sophia saw something different. This wasn't a man who solved problems with phone calls. "There are some kids," she said slowly. "They think it's funny that I can't, that I'm different now." Bull's jaw tightened. Behind him, 8 motorcycles revved in unison, a sound like distant thunder promising storms. "Show us," Bull said. They appeared around the corner, like a scene from Sophia's worst nightmares made real. Derek Hoffman and his pack of jackals, 5 teenagers with cruel eyes and time to kill. They saw the wheelchair first, then the motorcycles, and for a moment, uncertainty flickered across Derek's face. But teenage bullies run on momentum and audience, and backing down in front of his crew wasn't an option. Well, Derek called out, swaggering forward with the confidence of someone who'd never been truly challenged. Wheels brought back up. "What's the matter? Can't fight your own battles." Bull remained mounted, hands relaxed on his handlebars, but every line of his body radiated controlled danger. "Son, I'd recommend you and your friends find somewhere else to be. This is a public sidewalk, old man." Derek shot back, emboldened by what he mistook for passivity. "We got as much right to be here as the cripple and her biker gang." The word cripple hit the air like a physical blow. Sophia's face flushed with shame and fury. But before she could respond, 8 motorcycle engines cut to silence with military precision. The sudden quiet was more terrifying than any roar. Bull dismounted slowly, deliberately. 6'4" of granite and leather, and barely contained violence. Behind him, 7 other bikers followed suit, their movements synchronized, purposeful. Bull's voice was soft now, conversational, which somehow made it infinitely more dangerous. "You just said something that crossed a line. And in my experience, people who cross lines need to be educated about where those lines are." Derek's bravado wavered. Up close, these weren't the cartoon bikers from movies. These were men who'd earned their leather through blood and brotherhood, who'd learned that respect wasn't given, it was commanded. "We ain't afraid of you," Derek said, but his voice cracked on the last word. "You should be," said a voice from behind Bull. Jake Hammer Morrison stepped forward, 5'8" of concentrated fury, his arms crossed, revealing tattoos that told stories of military service and civilian protection. "See, we got what you might call a code. We protect those who can't protect themselves. And right now, This little sister here needs protecting from punk kids who think disability makes someone weak. Bull pulled out his phone. With deliberate movements, he scrolled through his contacts and hit a number. The call connected on the first ring. Priest? It's Bull. We got a situation in Millbrook. Bunch of kids harassing a girl in a wheelchair. Yeah, that kind of situation. How many brothers you got available? He listened for a moment, his smile growing cold and sharp. 300? Perfect. Maple Street, near the old Dairy Queen. And Priest? Bring the colors. All of them. He hung up and looked at Derek, whose face had gone the color of old concrete. Son, you got about 40 minutes to think real hard about the choices you've made and the kind of man you want to be. Because in 40 minutes, this street's going to be filled with more bikers than you've ever seen outside of Sturgis. And they're all coming here because you thought it was funny to pick on a little girl who's already fighting battles you can't even imagine. What happened next became the stuff of legend in Millbrook. Phone calls spread like wildfire through the motorcycle community. Brother called brother, club called club, and a network of loyalty that stretched across 3 states activated with the efficiency of a military operation. The Desert Saints, the Iron Wolves, the Road Warriors, the Thunder Kings. Clubs that had ridden together and apart for decades, united by a code older than their rivalries. Protect the innocent, defend the defenseless, and show the world that brotherhood meant something more than leather and chrome. Marcus Priest Valdez commanded the largest crew, the Southwestern Alliance, a confederation of clubs that had learned to settle disputes with words instead of weapons, to channel their strength toward protection instead of predation. At 67, Priest was legend walking, a man who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, built a construction empire from nothing, and never backed down from a fight worth fighting. When Bull's call came through, Priest was in the middle of a business meeting. He excused himself, stepped outside, and made 8 phone calls that would bring 300 motorcycles to a small town that had never seen more than 50 bikes in one place. What's the situation? Priest asked his lieutenant, a barrel-chested man known as Tank. Kid in a wheelchair getting hassled by teenage punks. Bull's on scene with 8 brothers, requesting backup. Priest's expression darkened. In the hierarchy of injustices that demanded response, picking on disabled children ranked somewhere between kicking puppies and burning churches. Full colors, he said quietly. I want every patch, every club, every brother who believes in something bigger than himself. And Tank? Yeah, boss? Call the news stations. This is going to be a story worth telling. As Derek and his crew slunk away, not gone, just repositioned to watch from a safer distance, Sophia found herself surrounded by 8 men who'd stepped out of their morning routine to defend her honor. The reality of what was happening began to sink in. You call more bikers? She asked, equal parts awed and terrified. Bull knelt beside her chair again. Sophia, let me tell you something about brotherhood. It's not about the leather or the bikes or looking tough. It's about standing up when someone can't stand up for themselves. It's about showing bullies that their victims aren't alone. But 300 people? For me? Especially for you. Bull's eyes were gentle but fierce. You know, why? Because you're not just fighting those punk kids. You're fighting something bigger. You're fighting the idea that being different makes you less. That having a disability makes you weak. That you should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity people decide to throw your way. Sophia's throat tightened. Sometimes, I feel like I should be grateful. Like I'm asking for too much, wanting to be treated like everyone else. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sister. Jake stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. My little brother was born with cerebral palsy, spent his whole life in a wheelchair. And you know what he taught me? He taught me that courage isn't about walking. It's about moving forward no matter what tries to stop you. And right now, you're the bravest person on this street. The rumble started again, distant but growing. Not 8 engines, this time dozens. Then hundreds. The sound rolled through Millbrook like mechanical thunder, and windows began opening as residents peered out to see what was happening to their quiet Tuesday morning. They came from every direction, a river of steel and chrome flowing through the streets of Millbrook like nothing the town had ever seen. Harley-Davidsons and Indians, custom choppers and touring bikes, each machine carrying a rider whose colors told a story of loyalty and brotherhood. The Desert Saints led the procession, their black and silver patches gleaming in the morning sun. Behind them rode the Iron Wolves from Phoenix, their patch featuring a snarling wolf's head over crossed wrenches. The Thunder Kings from Tucson followed, their blue and gold colors marking them as the club that protected domestic violence survivors across the Southwest. More kept coming. The Road Warriors from Flagstaff, the Steel Horses from Yuma, independent riders who'd heard the call and dropped everything to answer it, veterans who rode to remember fallen brothers, professionals who wore suits Monday through Friday but found their souls on weekends, men and women whose lives had been marked by loss and redemption, who'd learned that sometimes the only family you could count on was the one you chose. They filled Maple Street from curb to curb, engines idling in perfect synchronization, creating a wall of sound that could be heard 6 blocks away. 300 riders, each wearing colors that represented honor earned through service, loyalty proven through sacrifice. Derek and his friends watched from behind a telephone pole, their teenage cruelty shrinking in the face of adult consequence. This wasn't the world they understood, where might made right and weakness invited predation. This was something older, more fundamental, the ancient law that protectors existed to shield the vulnerable. Bull stood and surveyed the assembled brotherhood. Priest had positioned himself at the center, his white beard and weathered face marking him as an elder worthy of respect. Tank flanked his right side, a mountain of muscle and motorcycle maintenance. To his left stood Maria Phoenix Rodriguez, president of the Desert Roses, the women's riding club that had broken down barriers and earned their patches through skill and courage instead of connections and luck. Brothers and sisters, Priest's voice carried across the assembled crowd. We're here for Sophia Martinez, a young lady who asked for nothing more than the right to go to school without being harassed. And we're here for every kid like her who's been told that being different makes them weak. He gestured toward Sophia, who sat in her wheelchair surrounded by 300 guardians, her eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. This little sister right here represents something important. She represents the idea that courage comes in all forms, that strength isn't measured by what you can do with your legs, but by what you choose to do with your heart. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the motorcycle rumble. Police cars, fire trucks, and an ambulance, the full emergency response to what dispatcher had logged as motorcycle gang activity near the school. Sheriff Patricia Collins emerged from the lead cruiser, her hand instinctively moving toward her weapon before she took in the scene. No violence, no property damage, no threat beyond the overwhelming presence of organized brotherhood. She'd been sheriff for 15 years, long enough to know the difference between troublemakers and protectors. These riders sat quietly, respectfully, their engines idling but their posture peaceful. And at the center of it all sat a little girl in a wheelchair, tears streaming down her face not from fear, but from something that looked suspiciously like joy. Priest, Sheriff Collins called out, recognizing the legendary club president. What's the situation here? Sheriff, we got a report of teenagers harassing a disabled child on her way to school. We're here to ensure her safe passage and to demonstrate that our community protects its vulnerable members. Collins looked around at the assembled riders, then at Derek and his crew, who were slowly backing away from the scene. She dealt with these boys before: minor vandalism, petty theft, the kind of escalating behavior that usually led to serious trouble if left unchecked. And where might these teenagers be? Bull pointed toward the telephone pole. Over there, ma'am. Having what I'd call a moment of reflection about their life choices. Collins approached Derek's group, her expression stern but fair. Boys, I think it's time we had a conversation about harassment, intimidation, and the legal definition of assault. Anyone who wants to continue this discussion down at the station is welcome to keep bothering this young lady. Derek's defiance crumbled entirely. Faced with 300 bikers, the sheriff, and the dawning realization that his actions had consequences, he found himself stammering apologies and backing away with the speed of genuine fear. What happened next transformed not just Sophia's morning, but the entire town's understanding of what protection looked like. The motorcycles formed a procession unlike anything Millbrook had ever seen. Sophia, in her wheelchair, rolled down the center of Maple Street, flanked by 300 riders moving at walking pace, their engines barely above idle, their presence absolute. People emerged from houses, shops, and offices to witness the parade. Children pointed in wonder. Adults stood in respectful silence. The local newspaper editor grabbed her camera and began documenting what would become the most famous photographs in the town's history. Store owners came outside. The postal workers stopped his route to watch. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop began to cry, remembering her grandson who'd been born with spina bifida and who'd faced his roof-wide own battles with playground cruelty. At Lincoln Middle School, Principal Foster received a phone call that would define his career. Principal Foster, this is Sheriff Collins. You've got about 200 motorcycles heading your way, escorting one of your students to school. I need you to understand that these are the good guys, and I need you to make sure your staff understands that too. Foster hurried outside to see the impossible sight of his parking lot filling with motorcycles. In the center of the formation, Sophia Martinez rolled toward the school entrance with a smile that could have lit the entire building. As they reached the school, Priest dismounted and walked beside Sophia's wheelchair. The 300 riders followed suit, creating a living corridor of leather and loyalty leading to the front doors. "How do you feel, little sister?" Priest asked gently. Sophia looked around at the faces surrounding her. Weathered faces marked by years of hard living and harder choices, but kind eyes that had seen her worth when others saw only limitation. "I feel like I'm not alone anymore," she whispered. "You were never alone," Bull said, kneeling beside her chair one more time. "You just couldn't see your family yet." Jake pulled something from his vest pocket, a small patch with a Desert Saints insignia. "This is for you, Sophia. It means you're under our protection. It means that anytime someone thinks they can pick on you because you're different, they're going to have to answer to 300 brothers and sisters who believe that courage comes in all shapes and forms." He pinned the patch to Sophia's backpack with the solemnity of a military decoration ceremony. But more than that, Phoenix stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd fought for respect in a male-dominated world. "This patch means you're part of something bigger. It means you understand that the strong protect the weak, that brotherhood isn't about blood, it's about choice. And we choose to stand with you." The 300 motorcycles didn't just disappear after delivering Sophia to school. They became a permanent presence in her life and, by extension, in Millbrook itself. Every Tuesday, a rotation of club members escorted Sophia to school. Not because she needed protection, Derek and his crew had learned their lesson with biblical finality, but because the town needed to be reminded that some things were worth defending. The local newspaper ran a feature story that went viral. 300 Angels: How Motorcycle Brotherhood Transformed a Small Town. The photos of Sophia surrounded by her leather-clad guardians spread across social media, generating thousands of comments from people who'd never considered that bikers might be protectors rather than predators. The economic impact was immediate and lasting. Bikers from across the region made pilgrimages to Millbrook, wanting to see the town where brotherhood had made a difference. They ate in local restaurants, stayed in local hotels, shopped in local stores. The mayor, initially concerned about the town's image, found herself cutting ribbons at new businesses that catered to motorcycle tourism. But the deeper transformation was in hearts and minds. Teachers at Lincoln Middle School began incorporating discussions about disability, difference, and acceptance into their curricula. The town council passed an ordinance requiring all new construction to exceed ADA compliance standards. Local businesses competed to become the most accessible, the most welcoming to people with disabilities. Derek Hoffman underwent his own transformation. Mandated to perform community service at the local Disability Resource Center, he met adults and children whose courage in the face of physical challenges humbled his understanding of strength. By the end of his service, he'd applied to become a volunteer, learning that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the work. 6 months later, Sophia Martinez stood at a podium in the town square, addressing a crowd gathered for the first annual Courage on Wheels celebration. The town had declared it a permanent holiday, honoring not just people with disabilities, but anyone who'd found the strength to move forward despite obstacles. People asked me what it felt like to have 300 bikers show up for me, Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. And I tell them it felt like being seen, really seen, not as someone to pity or ignore or push around, but as someone worth protecting. Behind her, a permanent memorial had been erected. Not a statue of bikers or motorcycles, but a simple bronze plaque with words that had become the town's unofficial motto. Courage comes in all forms. Strength protects the vulnerable. Brotherhood chooses family. Bull, now 63 and serving as the town's honorary marshal of motorcycle events, stood with tears in his eyes as Sophia continued her speech. But the most important thing those bikers taught me wasn't about standing up to bullies. It was about understanding my own worth. They didn't rescue me, they reminded me that I was strong enough to rescue myself. They just made sure I wasn't alone while I did it. The crowd erupted in applause. Among them stood Derek Hoffman, now a sophomore in high school and a volunteer at the Disability Center, learning that true strength meant lifting others up instead of pushing them down. Principal Foster, who'd instituted the most comprehensive anti-bullying program in the state, smiled as he watched his students who now competed to assist classmates with disabilities rather than mock them. Sheriff Collins, who'd worked with the motorcycle clubs to create a community watch program that extended far beyond Millbrook, nodded approvingly as she surveyed a town transformed. And in the crowd, 300 patches gleamed in the afternoon sun: desert saints and iron wolves, thunder kings and road warriors, independent riders and club presidents, all united by the understanding that sometimes the greatest battles were fought not with fists but with presence, not with violence, but with the simple revolutionary act of showing up for people who needed to know they weren't alone. As the ceremony concluded and motorcycles began their familiar rumble, Sophia Martinez rolled down the newly accessible main street of Millbrook, surrounded not by 300 guardians now, but by 300 friends who'd learned that courage, like love, multiplied when shared. The girl who'd once sat helpless at an impossible curb now moved through her town like royalty, not because she'd been rescued, but because she'd reminded an entire community what it meant to be human. The bikers who'd answered Bull's call had given her something precious. Not pity, not charity, but recognition. The acknowledgement that every person, regardless of ability, deserved to move through the world with dignity intact and head held high. And in the end, that recognition had transformed everyone it touched. The bikers who remembered why they'd chosen brotherhood over solitude, the town that learned to measure strength by compassion rather than dominance, and one 12-year-old girl who discovered that sometimes asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the beginning of finding your tribe. The motorcycles faded into the distance, but their message remained, carved into the heart of a small town that had learned a simple truth. When good people choose to stand together, miracles become as common as morning sunshine and as powerful as 300 engines thundering in perfect harmony. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.